Thanks, Kate. Hi, everybody. Right, I'm gonna hit share screen. And everybody see my slides?
Looks good.
Okay. Thanks, Kate. All right, I'm gonna hide that little hide floating media controls. Okay, so we're gonna talk 27 quick tips, and I've got the chat box open on my screen here. So if you've got questions, please ask them throughout. We don't have to wait for them. I'm happy to answer them during the middle of it, but we're gonna go through this quickly. But I do want to answer your questions, and if you've got suggestions on things that I'm offering tips wise that you guys do a different way, or that you found that work better for your property, please let me know, because this is an opportunity to share, because we want to make sure that everybody's doing this as easy as possible, because we all know that managing dietary needs can be quite a bit of a hassle. So thanks for being here, and let's hit play. Okay, so the first tip is about accessibility. And I want to talk about, when you're looking at this picture here, this woman in her wheelchair is trying to access the food. That croissant is way far away from her. And we have to think about the accessibility of our food and beverage functions. For those with dietary needs, literally dietary needs, or food allergies, medical conditions, things like that. But we also, this is a dietary need in a sort of a manner, is that she can't access that food and beverage from her position. So we have to look at the access that we're providing for attendees with the menus that we're designing, as well as how to get into the spaces and how to understand and read. And it does look like this is in her house, but the point is there. The other part too is visually seeing the food and beverage, or being able to access that. So if you've got individuals that are coming through your property that are blind or visually impaired, do you have somebody there to help them with the accessibility of that, reading the labels, letting them know what's in that food and beverage that you're serving. So access comes in a variety of different ways, but looking at it, designing the plates so that they're closer to the edge of the table, or putting signage out that actually lists the allergens of the type. There's a lot of you from Europe here. So accessing those top 14 allergens. If you're in Canada, it's 11. If you're in the US, it's 8. So looking at making sure the labeling is there for that. So that's a level of access that we can provide for managing dietary needs. The banquet event order, that's my next one, is, we're typically looking at this banquet event order on the back of the house and the front of the house. And my quick tip on this is that when we're looking at dietary needs, and we need to spell it out. I was talking to 2 attorneys last week or 2 weeks ago, and this is a contract. This event order for the catering aspect of our events is another contract. And so we need to be spelling out what we're serving attendees that have different dietary needs. So instead of saying 25 vegan or 3 gluten-free, we need to actually spell out, just like we do with all other food and beverage items on a typical buffet or banquet event order, we need to spell out the vegans will be provided a portobello mushroom with a gluten-free demi-glaze sauce. I'm pulling stuff out of my rear to talk about that, but describing what those food and beverage options are versus just saying blanket, this is how many vegans that we have. Because if chef who's designed that menu doesn't come to work that day, for whatever reason, we need the servers and the chefs in the kitchen who are going to be preparing that food need to know what's being served. So it's very clear. And then the meeting planners as well understand what is being served to their attendees and can ask questions. This is also another great tip or way to communicate with your servers, because we all know servers pulled up those BEOs out of their back pocket when they're asked about something from their attendees. And so having that information on this banquet event order is clearly delineated for them on what to explain to an attendee about what's being served is really, really important. Okay, cooking in the kitchen, chefs, line cooks, pastry chefs. We need to understand, everybody in the kitchen needs to understand about dietary restrictions. How many of them have been trained on food allergies? How many of them been trained to understand using different equipment for food allergic individuals, or the cleaning process of how to do that? And with COVID, I think that has actually opened up our eyes a little bit more to maintaining our practices in the kitchen and what chefs need to do, but everybody needs to be on a clear path and preventing cross-contamination in the kitchen. One of the catering companies in the US, I heard a story from a couple of years ago that they had a couple of people that were attending this event that were gluten-free. Well, the pastry chef and the client had ordered their signature dessert, and the pastry chef decided to make that dessert gluten-free. Well, a lot of gluten-free dishes or flours are made with nut flours, or desserts are made with nut flours. Well, so she made it with nut flours, but she didn't communicate that information to the executive chef or the other chef for that event. And they had somebody who was anaphylactic to nuts at that event. And that person ended up in the hospital because of that communication. So it's really, really important that all of the chefs, all of the line cooks, anyone who is actually receiving food and beverage understands the reasons why we're doing something. We're making an alteration to a menu, or, you know, from the pastries all the way to the entrees, you know, as well as in the ordering process. Another chef that I've talked to ordered a specific product from his food service supplier, and they were out of that specific product, which he had ordered because it was free of an allergen, a specific allergen that it needed to be. Well, that food service company was out of that, and they just automatically substituted another one which contained the allergen. And it wasn't communicated to the receiving department that they should have turned that product away because it didn't meet the needs that they had. So in the kitchen, the chefs, the cooks, the food and beverage directors, everybody on the team needs to understand about dietary restrictions. Okay, so this service dog picture here is really to talk about disabilities. So I mentioned in that first slide, accessibility, we're talking about dietary, we're talking about somebody who's mobility, in a wheelchair or using a walker, or visually impaired, somebody with a service dog coming in. What are your best practices for allowing those service dogs, those individuals, to come into your food and beverage venues to get the food? And in the United States, the Americans with Disabilities Act was amended in 2008, changing or adding some terminology to the list of major life activities that are considered disabilities, and that includes eating. So in the US, a disability also includes individuals who have food allergies, celiac disease, heart disease, diabetes, and obesity. And if they need to eat a specific way as to not harm themselves, they're considered to be covered under the Americans with Disabilities Act. And so that's why, considering the disabilities of our attendees as they're coming into our food and beverage functions and sitting down and eating those items, it's really important to understand that those with disabilities are an important part of our policies and procedures and how we handle them. Okay, this is a picture of somebody administering epinephrine for an allergic reaction, but I want to talk about, when you're managing dietary restrictions, we need to make sure that we have the correct medical team on staff as well. So does your venue actually have epinephrine on property? And is there someone trained on staff to administer epinephrine? And what about even a defibrillator? You know, we have to have defibrillators in the buildings in case somebody has a heart attack. Well, what about also having somebody on staff that knows what to do if somebody's having a diabetic reaction? And if you do have individuals who communicate to you that they have diabetes, or they have a heart disease, or they have a food allergy reaction, the tip here is to ensure that you're asking them, do you carry epinephrine? Do you have your insulin? And if in the case of an emergency, what are the procedures that we need to follow to ensure that we save your life, make sure that we protect you? So not only having it on your property, but also, and having someone trained on how to administer it, but also communicating with that attendee, that guest, on what emergency procedures they want you to help them with in case of that emergency. Next slide. Know the facts. So nutrition facts. In the European Union, you've got much stricter nutrition facts for unpackaged foods than we do in the States. We have to have it only on prepackaged foods unless we are at a restaurant that has more than 20 outlets, and they're serving the same food and beverage. So our conference centers don't have to have this information about that, nor are we required to have the facts about all of our food and beverage, but there are a lot of properties that are doing it. And the facts are, we want to know about the food and beverage that we're serving, but we also want to know about our attendees' needs. So looking at the rise in number of people with food allergies. So in the United States, there's 32 million people with food allergies. The number of vegans across the world is growing astronomically because of COVID. Individuals are wanting to know where their food is coming from. They're turning more plant-based because they're seeing what's going on in climate change. So there's two types of facts here to know. It's like the facts about your attendees and what you know of them and their dietary needs, but also that's really important to know the nutrition facts about what you're serving. And in a chat yesterday with a woman who owns a company called Certistar, she helps restaurants communicate the allergens in the food that they are serving. Reading labels is really, really important. So when you're communicating out to your attendees, having a notebook of the facts about those different ingredients, that are in the food that you're serving, because there's a lot of terminology out there that is not just, eggs and wheat and, milk or tree nuts. There are other things that people are allergic to. So making sure even the products that you're putting into the food and beverage that you're making, the ingredients, we need to keep some of that. We need to keep the ingredient list for those food and beverage, that knowing those nutritional facts about that food and beverage so we can communicate it clearly. I hope that was communicated clearly and you got that point on that fact, on that fact and that tip. Okay, so this is an abacus, old school abacus, to represent, knowing our numbers and counting our numbers. So we need to understand our head counts. We need to understand the food and beverage requests that we're getting and guaranteeing those numbers. So working with your planners to understand when they come in and they've requested an RFP from you, what are their numbers? What's their food and beverage history in the past? How many vegans do they have? How many gluten-frees? How many vegetarians? So that when you're designing your menus, you actually have that data in front of you, and then you can compare that to what their guarantees are and follow that history. Hopefully they're maintaining that history of how many things were requested. And that's really good for you all as to guarantee, tracking that information, but even providing to them at the end of the event that, hey, you requested 12 gluten-free dishes, but we actually had a request for 25. So you need to communicate that information, those guarantee numbers, to your planners so that they can then track that going forward and understanding it, and it helps you balance it out. There's a couple of properties that I've talked to that with recurring customers, they know who's coming in and they know they can actually track, and somebody's going to say, oh, well, we have 10% vegetarian, and they can go back and look and say, well, no, actually you had this many in the last 3 years. It was lower or higher. And so you can gauge that. and seeing where that's coming from. Okay, this one, there's a lot of food in these dishes right here, right? And there's a lot of things that you can't see. So my tip here is hidden ingredients. And that's going back to reading the nutrition labels and knowing the facts about the food and beverage that you're serving. So there's, in that middle one, there's cheese and there's cucumbers and there's tomatoes, and there's some spices. And then in that quinoa back there, you don't know what that mint is, or it looks like butternut squash in there, but those hidden ingredients that somebody isn't aware of. And because there are 170 foods that are known to cause allergic reactions, and granted, we're only required by law to know in the EU 14 and the States 8 and Canada 11, but there are 28, I think it's 28 foods that are regulated by governments around the world, including pork and tomatoes. Understanding the hidden ingredients of the food and beverage you're serving. But this is also important when you're thinking about your attendees. So you get your attendee list, right? And they've given it to you, and here are the allergens that people are allergic to, and they're not in the top 8. Somebody is allergic to nightshades, or somebody is allergic to garlic. That's going to be very important information to communicate to your attendees about what's hidden in this food and beverage. And so knowing that, and really, really important too, is communicating that to the servers. I was in an event in Atlanta and working it, and I was in charge of overseeing the food and beverage. I came on site for it, so I didn't have any planning to do with it. And they had served chipped beef and gravy. And the sign for the chipped beef and gravy said contains pork. And I looked at the banquet captain who was responsible for the signage. And I said, well, and we had some people that had a serious wheat allergy. And I said, you know that gravy contains milk and flour, right? And he's like, well, I don't cook. How would I know that? And so those hidden, and that's not hidden to me, but that's hidden to him. He doesn't know that. And so communicating those hidden ingredients is really important, especially when you have people that have pre-communicated their food allergies and other dietary needs. This picture here with a really scrumptious salad on it, but we're looking at inclusion here, talking about ensuring that we're providing inclusive experiences for everybody. No matter if they have food allergies, no matter if they are following a kosher diet or a halal diet or Rastafarian or vegan, but also ensuring that the inclusion of age and gender and color are also incorporated in that, and that's actually socioeconomic backgrounds. What is that food and beverage that we're serving? How are we being inclusive with what we're serving? Because serving an entire vegan meal to a group of guys from Iowa who eat meat and potatoes is probably not the greatest idea. Actually, there was a really long post yesterday, and there was a short post with lots of comments on it yesterday about alcohol being served at events, and it's a lazy excuse for meeting planners to create this experience. And it was a really good conversation, but it came down to inclusion. Some people are like, let's completely eliminate alcohol from events. And other people are like, well, why are you eliminating my opportunity to participate and have a drink if I want to have a drink? And I'm not one to get sloshed, right? But we have to think about the inclusion in the menus that we're designing, food menus, as well as bar menus. And my comment back to them was, we need to be teaching our servers as well as our chefs that when we're creating our menus, we're thinking about the gluten-free and the milk allergies and everybody, to design a menu that is inclusive together all from the get-go, but then also thinking about that bar menu, because typically people who don't drink for religious reasons, personal preferences, or whatever, our only options are a small glass of water or bottled water or soda. And for people who don't want to drink soda, we need to and are tired of drinking water all day long, what can we do that's inclusive, that almost looks like a cocktail, but it's not, it's a mocktail. So thinking how we're incorporating that inclusion across the board. And one other inclusion thing too here is this table, and it kind of goes back to the accessibility slide earlier, is there's my friend Elisa, who I met at an event, and she uses a wheelchair. And when I met her, she came to sit at a table just like this, and there were chairs all around the table and at every one of the tables. And she couldn't pull her wheelchair up to a table. So she asked one of the servers, can you remove a few chairs so I can pull my wheelchair up? Well, they proceeded to remove all of the chairs and put a handicap sign on the table so that she could eat by herself. So that's also not creating an inclusive experience for the attendees in that food and beverage function. Maintaining kind of that inclusion here is, let's talk about religious-based dietary needs. You've got kosher, halal, Rastafarian. How are you incorporating those into your menus? A lot of people, you know, bring food and beverage from outside if they need a certified kosher meals. But how are you incorporating that into your everyday plan? Do you have a certified kosher caterer that you can work with, or that can come in and get your kitchen certified for a specific event? What about halal meals? Do you have a caterer that you use to do that? Or have you, and then also looking at the kosher meals, individuals who aren't super strict, but want to follow the practices of no shellfish, no meat and dairy at the, you know, together, you know, how can you incorporate that into your menus as well? If anybody's been paying attention to what's going on in the UAE, and with the peace agreement in Israel, the Department of Tourism in the UAE has highly recommended that every property, anybody that's got food and beverage service for events, now has to provide kosher options for all of the guests coming in from Israel. And the airlines have now got, I think, 36 flights a day into Abu Dhabi and Dubai from Israel. So they're expecting a large influx of kosher Jewish followers to come into the country. So looking at what that is going to entail and how you can accommodate them. So there's one kosher caterer, at least that I know of, in Dubai right now, and she's helping all of those properties learn about kosher dining and things like that. So can you get an expert in to come in and talk to you about that so you understand it clearly as well? So we've talked about cooks and line cooks and pastry chefs, but let's talk about the kitchen too. What are your practices here to maintain your safety? You know, avoid cross-contamination. Do you have separate hot boxes? Do you have separate utensils and equipment that you use when you're creating meals for those individuals who have dietary restrictions? A couple of weeks ago, I listened to a webinar from a doctor at University of Boston Children's Hospital, and she and some colleagues are doing some research specifically on toasters, but on cross-contamination. And this is really good for us. The research is still going on, but they put fully gluten bread on a toaster, and then they put a gluten-free bread on the same toaster to see what that contact was. And the contact was very minimal, which is proving that we might not need actually an extra toaster for those gluten-free guests. But that doesn't mean when we're cooking, we still can't use the same water to cook gluten-free pasta as we are cooking the gluten-filled pasta. So will be some different things there, but some of the cross contact, the parts per million, were not being transferred. So, but we need to figure that out and understand that and teach our chefs in the kitchen, and you know, what equipment is being used for what different dishes, and do you have a separate area or a separate kitchen that you can actually prepare allergen-free food, or you have a separate kitchen that's actually kosherized, you know, that you're preparing those dishes. So making sure that, and then actually that's bringing it into the kitchen. You know, how are you when you're receiving the food and beverage from your purveyors, where is it being stored? How is it being stored? Just like you organize a refrigerator with the meats on the bottom so the juice doesn't come through, you know, allergy-free food should be kept at the top of the pantry so that they don't get contaminated being at the bottom from flour and things like that that are floating around. So thinking about those procedures in the kitchen is really, really important. That is tip number 11. Okay, labeling our food. So I talked about it a little bit briefly, but this QR code here, how many of you have gone to a restaurant and used a QR code now to pay for your food and beverage, or to actually look at the menu? You know, so labeling our food, there's a lot of new variety of ways that we can do it besides the standard, you know, hey, this is pork medallions with soy sauce on the side, you know, contains this, you know, having that label there on a buffet. But we can put it on our app, you know, and on the event app, if anybody's doing that, or you have an app for the property that you can easily create for each event saying this is what is on the buffet. But for the conference centers, everybody's going through the regular buffet or the open buffet for everybody. So can you put that on an app with a QR code? It might be, I don't think you want to do one for every single dish that's being served, a different QR code, but you could pull it up so that they can actually research and search for those items. But also having a menu that is labeled out, and let's see if I think I have that here, you know, putting something like this next to it that's pre-designed and you can check it off, right, with a whiteboard or a Sharpie or whatever you've got. Or you can do stickers like this contains. I know the Washington Center in the conference center in Washington, D.C. has icons and things that they use. And I know the property in Dallas has icons that they use and how they're communicating. So creating your own method of communication so that it's there, so people can read it on their own. Talking to some disability experts, that's one of the things that individuals with disabilities want, just like somebody with abilities, is we want to be able to go through a buffet line or a restaurant and be able to read, you know, what we're serving or what we're eating, and not have to ask a lot of questions about the food and beverage or the services that are being offered. Let me find it out on my own. So what can we provide our attendees that can help them find the answers on their own? And granted, you will get people still saying, yeah, I've sent this to you 5 times, you know, you haven't read it yet. I have provided you that. So, but figuring out ways that we can label and provide that information there so that we can find it on our own. Even chat bots would work as well, you know, saying, hey, what's in this pork or what's on the salmon, you know, and that I'm eating today. You know, figuring out how you can communicate that information through different forms of labeling. And then coming to our menus. So we talked about inclusion, we talked about labeling and how do we design these menus and, you know, creating inclusive menus. And so this is a menu, the wording on the side is a menu that I did for somebody. And as you can see in the red, it says contains the onions, garlic, peppers, because we had people who were allergic to those items. But it's also gluten-free, vegan, and nut-free. So making sure that you're clearly delineating between those two things. And there was an event I attended in February before the lockdowns. And like one item on a buffet of, I think it was 10 things, it said this one contains one of the signs said contains garlic, but none of the other ones said that they were garlic free. So to me, that's a little bit deceptive in some, it's not deceptive, but it's not communicating clearly. But saying what it contains and then what it's free of. And I know you don't want your menus to be bogged down with a lot of different things, but I'll show you another menu that's done differently as well in a minute. But just figuring out the best way to communicate it for your attendees on that menu. And and on the next menu, it'll show you, but when planners are ordering food and beverage from you, having that information clearly outlined for them makes it easier for them to pick the menu, and then relieving you of doing some back work, some additional work on the back end. So do it up front so they can easily pick it. There's a hotel I worked with in Vegas, and they're like, just pick your menu and then we'll figure out the dietary needs afterwards. Like, no, I want to actually design my menu, incorporating those dietary needs into that menu up front. So then there's less work on both sides, after the menu is designed. There's going to be two pictures of utensils in this slide, but with two different meanings to them. So my tip here is to understand that this is a necessity. Dietary needs are a necessity. I was talking to a woman the other day, Joanna Foreman, she has a company called Culinary Cuisine, or Conflict Cuisine, sorry. And she's a leader in gastro diplomacy. And we were talking about the dietary needs. It's diplomatic. It's gastro diplomatic in providing these needs for individuals. And just like this equipment is necessary to create menus, it's just as necessary for you to understand the dietary needs and provide for them. And there's one chef that I chatted with, he's like, well, can I just, all this equipment I have to buy for these attendees, I want to pass it on to them. I want to pass on the cost to them. And I'm sure that there will be a way that you can pass that on, but you can't charge every single person that fee for that food, for that piece of equipment. It's the cost of doing business, and it's a necessity because you don't want anyone in the hospital for a food allergy reaction, a diabetic reaction. You don't want anybody suing you because you provided not enough vegan options for their wedding, and somebody did sue a property for that. So you have to think about the fact that this is a necessity, and how are you going to incorporate that into your overall plan for your property. So this is options. And again, it's kind of redundant, but it's providing different options. So because typically somebody who goes through a buffet that's gluten-free, and I'm not saying every one of, some properties are really, really good at this, and some planners are really, really good at making sure that there are more than one option. But, a lot of times when you go to a restaurant or you go to an event, you get the salad if you're gluten-free or you're vegan. And one gentleman I talked to, and this was a couple of years ago, but he was a planner and he went on a site visit and he was vegan. And the salespeople were taking him out to lunch and dinner. And the only option that he was provided was a salad with some shredded carrots and tomatoes, while everyone else was having a 3-course meal. And that was for lunch as well as for dinner. And he left very frustrated, and it was a $125,000 piece of business. And he looked at me and he said, well, what do I do? And I said, well, if you're the person signing the check and the salesperson didn't recognize that you didn't have options to eat outside of romaine lettuce and carrots, what are they going to do for your attendees as well? So that's thinking about providing more than just one option. And granted, they were at a different event or a different venue restaurant than where they were, but that has to be taken into consideration as well. And here are a couple of those menu that I was talking about. So you can see, I don't know if you can see me pointing, I'm pointing down at the thing, but it says there's a key. And this is really, really important because there are so many menus out there that I have seen that they do not provide a key. They put V or they put VEG, but they don't tell you if it's which one's vegan and which one's vegetarian. And they don't tell you that N means nut-free. So individuals, and we might think that that's just, hey, duh, right? You should know that that's what that means. But with everybody being able to do it differently, especially in the EU, each state or each country is allowed to code your menus differently. And mustard might be number 1 in the UK, but it's number 5 in Italy. So kind of trying to create a process that people can easily understand it, and providing the key where it's really, really accessible. And this is actually a catering company's menu, and it's labeled here for the planners to choose from. And I love that there are different options. So, and here's some lunch in a bowl, kebab boxes, fajita boxes. So they've got the vegetable. They don't have any there. I don't see any. The roasted zucchini plate is the vegan option there. So they do have options across the board. And that, I think that's a great way to lay out your menus and design your menus. Okay, Kate, are there any questions in here? The chat is quite blank in my.
Chat is quiet, Tracy, but guys, feel free to pose any questions to Tracy for the session.
Yeah, if you have any questions, please let me know. Okay, so policies and procedures. What are your policies and procedures for your venue about managing dietary restrictions and communicating those needs? And for me, and for venue wise here, your policies and procedures should go to your sundry shop and actually should apply to your room service policies and procedures as well as what's being served. So looking at those and making sure that everybody across the board knows that. And it actually even comes down to the person answering the phone at the front desk. Hey, making sure that they know who to send somebody to that has a question, because it's really frustrating when somebody calls up and says, hey, I've got this and this need, who do I talk to? Or, oh, well, we don't do that, right? We don't accommodate that, or I don't know the answer to that. So making sure everybody in the whole property is aware of the policies and procedures on handling needs. This is an image to talk about quality control. Where he's testing the temperature of that chicken there. So ensuring that going back to your policies and procedures, what are your policies and procedures for quality control to ensure that dishes are labeled correctly, or they're free from, or, when they go out that, going back to that one venue in Atlanta, they also put out a mousse, and it said chocolate mousse says it contained gluten. And I'm like, what mousse contains gluten? Well, it was a bagged mousse that they just poured water in, and it actually had top 5 of the top 8 allergens in it, but it wasn't communicated out to anyone. So what is the quality control that you have? Is the executive chef taking over or checking everything before it goes out? Do you have an expediter that's managing that to maintain that quality control?
Tracy, can I come in there? We've got a question come in from Nicole. Her on-site chef refuses to label anything gluten-free. They will only do made with gluten-free ingredients. Do you have any suggestions on this? And they don't, just to make a note, they don't hire them, they are hired by the client.
Okay, so the chef, and I think it's because, and if I get this right, the chef doesn't want to say it's gluten-free because if he's in an environment, well, there is gluten, but it's made with gluten-free products. Yeah, so, and that's a tough question, and you can't even, or that's a tough way to answer it, because you don't want to say gluten friendly, because nobody likes that, nobody can trust that. But you can actually say that it is gluten free and put a disclaimer at the bottom saying these items are made with gluten. It's stated gluten free because it was made with gluten free items, but please note that the kitchen is not certified gluten free. So and talking to experts in the gluten-free certification world, that's their preferred method of doing that. So I do understand where he is concerned, chef is concerned about putting that out there, but I think he could be, I don't know, convinced, but saying that it's gluten-free, but then putting that statement at the bottom of any menu that goes out, and any communication that goes out to an attendee through the registration system. So saying, hey, and I can send you a clause on that later on. So shoot me an email and I can send you a clause that says, we're working with our catering partners. This is not a certified gluten-free or allergen-free environment, but when we make you items, we are making sure that they are free of gluten by using gluten-free products. I hope that helps, but definitely reach out, send me an email, and I will shoot you that clause, which you then need to go get your lawyer to confirm and your chef to be okay with. But registration, if you're the property, if you're the planner, taking information out about your attendees when they come in, it's really good to ask questions. Hey, do you have any disabilities or needs that we need to accommodate while you're in our property to ensure that you have the full experience, whether it's dietary needs, mobility, hearing, vision, things like that, so that you can address those needs in advance and be ready for them. And then communicate, and then registration is actually another way to communicate out, like I just said, hey, here's what we're doing to ensure your safety in a variety of different ways. If you have any questions, reach out to this person, or this person, and give them that way to communicate with you directly to get questions. And then put it all under the frequently asked questions as well, about the food and beverage that's happening. Okay, so this is the thing on signs and symptoms. These are the signs and symptoms of somebody having a diabetic reaction. They get shaky, they get sweaty, they could be weak or tired. These are also symptoms of somebody having an allergic reaction. Although they're gonna break out in hives, or they can start coughing, their throat's gonna start to swell. These are the things that we need to pay attention to when we're looking at our attendees, and if they don't feel well. But the other part too is, hey, other signs and symptoms to pay attention to are, hey, nobody's eating this food over here, or these people are walking through the buffet, but they're not picking anything up and they've now left. Those are other signs and symptoms of something's not going right with our menu, or we're not providing an inclusive experience here. So having somebody, on staff that's understands diabetic as well as food allergy reactions, a medical I don't know if anybody's got medical experts on property or an EMT on property, but being trained in knowing these things, having somebody trained in that is really, really important to ensuring attendee safety. And if somebody is diabetic, having, easy access to some sugar to help them manage their blood sugar if it drops too low, things like that. So paying attention to our attendees' behaviors and sudden reactions is another to understand. So top allergens. This is understanding the allergens that we have. And as I mentioned earlier, there are more than 170 foods that are known to cause allergic reactions. The top 8 that cause 90% of allergic reactions worldwide are fish, shellfish, eggs, peanuts, tree nuts, milk, and soy. And okay, let's see, what did I say? Peanuts, tree nuts, eggs, milk, fish, shellfish, soy. Which one did I miss? I know them all. Okay, I'll write them down for you. But in Europe, you also have mustard and celery and sulfites and lupine, and you break out shellfish from crustaceans to mollusks. Here in the US, it's just crustaceans that we need to regulate. But understanding what those top dietary needs are, and this is going to drive me nuts, that eggs, milk, soy, peanuts, tree nuts, shellfish, fish. And oh my gosh, somebody type in the chat which one that I missed, because my mind is wheat. It's right in front of me. It's wheat and wheat. So here in the US, it's wheat, and that actually globally is around the world, but in the EU, you name it, cereals containing gluten. So understanding what those all are and what that can do. Talking to Shandy from Certistar the other day about the 170 allergens is that, people can be allergic to anything, whether it's tree nuts or it's nightshades or it's maltodextrin. And what I found out from her too is that citric acid can come from a variety of different foods. It can come from oranges, it can come from wheat, it can come from pork. So and there's not really a clear way to figure out where it's coming from. So understanding what the top allergens are and how they react to individuals is really important to maintaining a clear and healthy and safe environment for your food and beverage. Okay, I mentioned the utensils earlier. Here they are again, is understanding all of the different utensils in your kitchen and how they can actually potentially cause cross-contamination issues. The mixer there in the middle here, right? If you're doing blended drinks, you know, are you doing them with nut milk or soy milk? You need to have a separate Vitamix or a separate blender if you've got people that are having allergic reactions. Your frying pans, if you're doing action stations with the server or cook right there, you know, you need, and you've got shrimp or pasta in those dishes, you need to make sure that you're cooking the gluten-free pasta in a separate pan. And you need to make sure that your chef is not taking his dish towel off of its waist and wiping it out and then making that allergen-free one. You need to make sure that, you know, clean gloves are used and clean towels are used. And COVID is really opening up everybody's eyes on what all of that means, but ensuring that your utensils are, how you're cleaning them and what you're using, and showing people the optics of that is really important. This purple dish here with the plate cover, that's great to deliver somebody who's got an allergen-free meal, you know, or using different colored plates or different shaped plates, round plates versus square plates. You know, allergen-free meals are delivered on square plates. And then how are you doing that? Thinking about all of the equipment that you're using, and do you have specialty equipment? Do you need it? That toaster, for example, maybe we don't need that specialty toaster, but we'll find out more about that in the coming months with their research. So this is a beautiful vegan taco that is delicious. And so we have to think about vegan and vegetarian and pescatarian and reducitarian and flexitarian and variety of different dietary needs out there. And even I said pescatarian, but understanding what the different levels of vegetarian and veganism is really important. Even paleo, which is not vegan and vegetarian, but, or pagan, which is vegan and paleo combined, which is basically flexitarian. And I can give you a cheat sheet of what all of those mean. But understanding and providing these different vegan options, because this is much better than a plate of carrots, which I know people have gotten when they ask for a vegan dish. This is a beautiful vegan dish that can be provided, and it looks like it's got lots of flavor in it and lots of texture in it, and that's really, really important when you're creating vegan and vegetarian dishes. We just don't want a plate of carrots. And it looks like there's some quinoa in here, and I found this really good recipe a couple of months ago to making vegan tacos with quinoa, and you roasted the quinoa with some Mexican spices on it. I could not tell the difference from regular hamburger meat. And if you want that recipe, I can send it to you. It was delicious. I will make that all the time. It was really, really good. So, but making sure that our vegan, vegetarian, and pescatarian options are hearty, are delicious, and very tasty. Who is responsible? And this list is, these icons are not everybody that's responsible for dietary needs, but it's the good portion of it. The attendee is responsible for letting us, communicating their needs to us in advance. But we also, this planner person has to create an environment where that attendee wants to communicate their needs and says, hey, I feel safe communicating it to Pinky here, that she's going to take care of me. Sales manager of the property, Nancy, you're a sales manager. You communicate, hey, our property, our chef is really good about accommodating dietary needs. Here's the environment that we have, and this is what we want. We can ensure that all of your attendees have this. Here are some pictures of some really good vegan dishes that we've done, and incorporating those tastings into that sales process. Catering sales manager or event manager on your property. This person is that go-between after the contract is signed to make sure that planners and attendees are taken care of. What does she or he need to know going forward, and how can that person communicate these needs to make sure that's safety? the chef and all of his line cooks, his pastry chefs, his ordering managers, they're responsible. The banquet captains, the expediters, who's responsible for labeling? Going back to those policies and procedures, and who the labeling aspect, who is responsible for labeling and who's got the final say on what's going out. And then your waiters. And in times of COVID, our waiters we've got fewer waiters than we've had before. And all of our waiters were, I think somebody told me the other day that the turnover is 7 months. It's quite frequent with waiters. So we're needing to do a lot of constant training for them and making sure that they're very knowledgeable, and having me as an attendee say, hey, do you know if this is this and this and this is in this dish? And the waiter's going to probably look at me dumbfounded, but give him or her the tools that then help her be responsible, him or her be responsible for answering those questions, saying, I don't know, but let me go get my banquet captain, or let me go get the chef. But making sure that they've got some tools in advance to help create that safe experience. And it is full circle here. So it's not one linear line. It kind of goes all the way around in an, let's call it a figure 8, right? Everybody's responsible for that. Quality control, and let's just examine everything that we're doing. This is just another level of quality control, examining what you're doing, triple checking, double checking, and triple checking on all of what you're doing in front of the house and on the back of the house. And this one, this guy he's yielding. He's got so much to be thankful for in this picture. Because he's got a really thick crop of food that he's going to harvest there. And that's the same thing with what you all can yield. When you learn how to manage dietary needs better, or create a more inclusive food and beverage experience, you can yield so much more business from that. In a conversation I had recently, think about when somebody goes out to a restaurant and they're vegan or gluten-free or whatever, and the only thing on the menu is boring chicken and some steamed broccoli or a baked potato and a salad. Think about the loss of revenue if they could have ordered something like those vegan tacos. That's a higher price ticket, food item ticket for them to provide extra money to your property and or to your server's pocket, right? Because higher bills relate to higher tips. So this is a really big opportunity to make more money, to increase your loyalty of your customers, to say, hey, I want to come back to this property. And it just opens up a more inclusive experience for everybody across the board. It's a positive opportunity when you learn how to manage dietary needs better. And granted, I'm going to tell you, it's not an end all be all. It's a constant learning experience, but it can yield you a lot more. And this guy is probably not going to eat by himself the majority of the time. His friends and family or business colleagues are going to come with him to dinner, and his dietary needs are going to dictate where they're going. And so that's not just his one plate that you just lost, it's potentially a bunch of other people's plates, and or the property itself for an event. How are you going to lose a piece of business like that $125,000 piece of business I said, because you didn't think about the potential yield by providing for dietary needs. And then lastly, with all of this is waste. Managing dietary restrictions, understanding them is an opportunity to reduce your waste. Because when you order a steak filet mignon for everybody and you've got 25 vegans, you just wasted 25 filet mignons because you didn't ask in advance. Or even if 8 hidden ingredients were in there, you've wasted that plate of food. So the food not only goes to waste, but so does your client's budget, and so does your food and beverage cost, right? So thinking about reducing that waste in your food and beverage menu planning is really, really important, taking that into consideration. And then Lastly, tip number 27 is that I want you to yell from the megaphone, from the top of the mountain. I want you to communicate everything that you've got about this inclusive food and beverage experience that you're providing. How can you communicate it? Hey, feature one of your vegan menus on your Instagram feed or on your Facebook feed. Have the chef do a demo. Hey, this is the vegan dish that we did, or this is the gluten-free vegan thing, or have a conversation with the local kosher caterer that you partner with to say, this is what we do for our clients that come in that follow kosher. You know, communicate it on your, frequently ask questions on your website, on your event registration sites. Make sure that you're communicating it also to all of your staff and your employees so that they know where it is. And they know how to help your guests and your other employees have a great experience within your property. So those are my 27 tips. This is me. Is there any other questions? We're right at the top of the hour.
That's fantastic timekeeping, Tracy, that. Do we have any questions for Tracy before we close today's session? I think we're good, Tracy. If I receive any in, I'll forward them on. But want to say a big thank you as always from IACC for your support. Another great session full of information for everybody to absorb. For those listening, we do have a couple more sessions this year running in December. So check those out on the IACC website under the webinar lineup. And as I said earlier, we will post this session onto our YouTube channel and on our on-demand page, as well as forward you the recording as well early tomorrow. So thanks again all for listening. Keep safe, stay well, and we'll see you on another session soon. Thank you.
Thanks, Kate.